see how that does. Can y'all hear that okay? How about now? A little higher. How's that? That good? Jerry, can you hear me? Okay, just making sure. So this morning, I got a little more pressure on me than usual. George is here, which means I'm going to have an open critique when we go back home. Never know how that's going to go. It is always good to be here. And this past, how many of y'all had a stressful week? Man, those holidays are brutal, aren't they? I think we had 15 at our house for dinner Thursday, and we had a really, it's funny, you know how you get to the big push and you get past the push and then all of a sudden just kind of, you kind of breathe easy and then you're like, well, then there's no push and you're like, you're kind of just a little lost. That's kind of how we felt a little bit this past week, because Michelle's son Christopher came in from Las Vegas. He got here Monday and he was here till Friday. He missed all the travel snafu because of the weather and everything. So, we'd originally planned to have him here for an entire week. And this is what I told Louise this about preaching today, was I didn't know, because if he got all the time off that he'd asked, then we'd be on our way to Cincinnati to see the Steelers and the Bengals, or the Steelers and the Bengals play today. But, it's 35 outside in snow, so I'm kind of glad that didn't work out. That would have been kind of tough. So this morning, in typical history teacher style, I decided to, as I was preparing for this week's message, I decided to do a history of Advent. Now, this is 100% self-serving, because I grew up in a Southern Baptist church and in a non-denominational church. Good morning, Horatio. And we didn't do much for Advent. There's a lot of the liturgical calendar things that we just didn't do. I mean, I didn't know about it, and I didn't have a phone to be playing on in church, so it's not like I missed it. I was there. We just didn't cover those things. So I started this week off looking into and learning about Advent, and so I have a brief history of Advent to kind of go with you. The word Advent comes from the Latin word adventus, which means coming or arrival. And so here are some key events, in the history of Advent. 4th century in France, the church began using the period before Epiphany as a time of preparation for baptism. This period was also called St. Martin's Lent and began on November the 11th, the feast of St. Martin of Tours, and then would go up until the Christmas season. Now, originally, Advent started out as a period of fasting, which I'm not sure what type, if that was biblical church, if it was dawn to night, fall, or if it was intermittent 16:8, 23:1, or 12:12. Nobody's an intermittent faster in here. You got that one. So that was what it was a beginning to a time of preparation. In the 5th century, Bishop Preptus directed that people fast 3 times a week from St. Martin's Day until Christmas. This practice was limited to the Diocese of Tours and then until the 6th century. And then in the 6th century, Roman Christians associated Advent with the coming of Christ, but not this first coming in Bethlehem, but with the second coming. Pope Gregory the First composed many of the prayers, antiphons, and psalms response for Advent. In the Middle Ages, Advent season became explicitly linked to Christ's first coming at Christmas. In the 19th century, Advent calendars became popular. Each day you'd have a verse and something to study and go about through. And in 1953, President Eisenhower popularized Advent calendars in the United States after a Newsweek cover photo showed him opening windows with his grandchildren. So it got a little popular push and got there. And then shortly after, in 1958, some good old capitalists, the Cadbury, the British candy company, started adding samples in the windows of Advent calendars. That's what I was most familiar with. And I've done a little research, and so you can get Advent calendars now with toys, fishing lures, pet treats, all kinds of things. There's actually a couple out there. There's one for Home Alone, the movie, which is one of the best Christmas movies ever, and then also for Christmas Vacation, and I have even seen an Advent calendar for Die Hard, which is up to debate whether that movie is a Christmas movie or not. To go with that, if you are like me and anything that you Google search begins to show up in your social media feed, you will see lots of different things that show up there. Advent calendars have been made a very long run in mine. Just know that anything that's on Instagram or Facebook, you should always go to Amazon first and search the exact title name. And if it is, you'll find out where they're buying it, doubling the price, and sending it to you. Just a little shopping tip to go with Advent calendars there. So now, as commercialized as it's become, Advent is now a major season celebrated by the Christian church, including the Roman Catholics, Anglicans, Episcopalians, and Lutherans. And so here we are today, the first Sunday of Advent. So Advent has four themes. The first theme is hope, and the second is peace, which begins the second week. The third is love, and the fourth is joy. And I think it's interesting that if we think about what the good news, the gospel is, as we think about it, I think those four words summarize what Christianity should be about the most. It should be about hope, peace, love, and joy. And a relationship with Jesus Christ can bring each of those things almost in those stages as you go through that. So I think it's great how that just kind of comes to go there. So 1 Peter 1:3 says that praise be to God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy he has given us new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Now, it's interesting that he said that we have a new hope from his resurrection. It wasn't necessarily, the birth is necessary for the resurrection, but it's the resurrection that is what our faith stands upon. Reminder, you heard me say before, not the Bible, not the church, but the death, burial, and resurrection and the life of Jesus Christ is what makes this very special. In the Old Testament, I believe I saw in my readings this week that there's over 300 prophecies relating to the coming of the Messiah. And those prophecies have been used to say who Jesus was, as if him saying, I'm the Son of God and all power rests in me is not enough. Those things that come there with that. So why did Jesus have to be born? We go back. We all know the story about the apple tree and the two in the garden, right? Christ came as a reconciliation, as a bridge between mankind and between God the Father. Because we lost what's the word I'm looking for? We lost our fellowship with him when sin entered into the garden, when disobedience came. God created man to be in a relationship with him, to reflect his image, and to share his love by being made in his likeness, essentially allowing humans to experience and express love, goodness, and creativity in the world. Jesus was sent to be a reconciliation for this separation that happened when Adam and Eve disobeyed. And so Advent begins, the number one thing of hope that in the first week that comes about is that with Jesus, we have a hope that we can have that relationship restored. Now, how many of y'all know some really cranky, miserable people? If you don't know one, that might be you, so just be aware if you didn't raise your hand. But some of the most miserable people I know are people that are what I like to say as off purpose. Meaning they're living their life. Their focus might be wrong. Their goals might be wrong. What they want to achieve is wrong. And some of them, by worldly standards, I mean, they're killing it. They're making money. They got fancy cars, big houses. They got all those things, but they're absolutely miserable. Y'all know folks like that? And so, when we look at what our purpose is, we understand why. If you go back to it, it says that we were made in God's image for fellowship, to be with him. That's what mankind began as, to be his, he gave us free will. He allowed us, he wanted us to be creative, he wanted us to be all these things. But when that separation began, or when that separation happened, we were unable to fulfill that purpose. And we know people that go through their lives, their entire life, and they seem like they have everything, but if you really get down to it and you get down into it, they say that there's something that's missing. And that's where the first week of Advent, the hope that Jesus comes, is because he gives us the hope that we can restore that relationship and that fellowship. And then we look at the other things with peace, love, and joy, and those all come as you progress down your walk of faith in becoming a disciple of Christ. I'm not talking about disciple the church, and I don't want to use the term Christian. I'm talking about being a follower of Jesus who does what Jesus called them to do. Because I think we all know that there's a lot of people out there that wave a Jesus banner, but that doesn't line up, that their mission and their message are in conflict. They don't line up. They don't do what they're called to do. They're not serving. They're not loving. They're not providing. They're not, doing those things that fulfill their purpose of what they're here for. Because, ultimately, when Jesus came, I have in my notes here, Jesus was sent to reconciliation for this separation, and he is our hope of redemption. Advent allows us to reflect back on the beginning of our salvation and ministry to others. Because it's not about coming to church on Sunday and sitting and getting. I mean, y'all know a lot of people that do that. They said, they go to the big place where maybe they're just a number or they're in a seat and nobody really knows what their name. They might know maybe a couple people that sit around them, but they get in and they get out. Maybe they're 5 minutes late and they leave 5 minutes early. I know a few folks like that. See, small church like this can't do that. Somebody knows, and you're probably here because you know somebody, so you might get a little to go with that. But if you remember that the arrival of the Messiah, the King of Kings, the one who has all authority in heaven and earth, is given to us in Matthew 18 through 20, or Matthew 28, 18 through 20. When Jesus gives the Great Commission, he says, Jesus came to them and he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. That culmination starts with the celebration of this week. We can have that assurance and that commission because we have the hope that Jesus brings us with being able to be reconciled. Not to be made perfect, not to have the perfect message, not to live the perfect life, not to be sinless. But we have an interceder. We have someone who has come to close that gap, to allow us to have the hope that we need to live the life that we should, to follow the commission that we've been given. Now, one of the things that's interesting is when we start looking at timing of things, how many of y'all know biblically that Christmas is technically not in December? Now, I'm telling you, there's some places you can't say that because it gets a little sticky. But we know that based on, if somebody wants to look on their phone of what the high temperature or what the average temperature is in Dallas, Texas this time of year, and what the average weather is, if you go several thousand miles, a couple thousand miles, maybe a couple thousand, maybe not. I have to check on that. I didn't MapQuest that to go all the way across. That Dallas and Israel are on about the same latitude, right? So the shepherds being out in the fields at this time of year, probably not happening, especially if you add another month to that. A lot of people will tell you historically that the church adjusted the calendar of Christ's birth, that he could have been born anywhere from June until about October. There's quite a bit of controversy, debate, I think is the better thing, because they can't prove it one way or the other, that goes through with that. But that was done. There was an adjustment made in the calendar by the Romans because they wanted to have basically, it might have been Roman business people, to be perfectly honest. They didn't want a festival in the fall and then a festival at the solstice, because that would be, cost them some money, shut things down. So they just decided to put them together to make it a little more efficient. Everybody kind of celebrate. That's why we have the holiday season. We get basically from, December on. I don't know how many actual official holidays are there. I think there's several that are there between the Christians, between the Jews, between the Muslims. I mean, it all kind of falls right in there. That alignment that goes with it. So when it happened isn't important. Like, there's some people that they have to know, and that's like a hinging point. But like I said, the hinge point of our faith is the resurrection of Jesus. His crucifixion, burial, and resurrection. So we look at when it happened, it doesn't really matter. We observe it. How many of y'all have holidays or you have anniversaries, and maybe you celebrate your anniversary at a different time just because of convenience? It doesn't make it any less important. It doesn't make it any less significant. It's just when it's chosen to be celebrated. So we go back and we look at what Jesus talked about with his with the Great Commission, we're told to basically go out, make disciples of men, teach them what I teach you, love God, love your neighbors yourself, serve them, and that's the process to reconciliation. That's the process for fulfillment. That's how we get hope, love, joy, and peace. Now, as we look at hope, as I wrap up here with the last little bit with hope, hope impacts our lives in three very specific ways, as believers especially. Hope allows us to see ourselves as Christ sees us, not as broken, useless shells, but as valuable individuals commissioned to do great works in Christ's name. Be the difference makers to others, and remember that we have a hope that this life is temporary, and we need to remember that we need to live in a way that honors the King that commissioned us. That's our first hope. The second hope. Hope tells us what is important. We should spend our earthly life focused on missions in the Great Commission. Love, serve, and honor. We're at a time in the season, we're in a time where most people have the most problems in this time of year. How many of you know someone that's alone? Maybe they were recently widowed. Maybe they have issues with their family. Heck, if they're alone, maybe they're the issue. We know some of those too. We've got a family full of them that they're alone on the holidays because they are the issue. Not pointing any fingers or naming any names, but we know who we're talking about. But that doesn't change what we're called to do. That doesn't change where our hope lies, because there's always hope that they can improve. And maybe they improve because of what we do. This time of year, maybe our job needs to be that we are the hope that somebody else needs. Hope impacts how we live our lives. We should live our lives using our time, talents, and treasures to bring and show honor for Christ. Now, here are some rewards of hopes, because, hey, everybody wants to know what the upside is for me, right? When I was in some of my business and marketing, I always talked about WIIF, everybody's favorite radio station. What's in it for me? So here we go. Hope brings us joy and peace. It gives us strength and courage to continue on with perseverance. And it gives us fulfillment, which leads to the fruit that we're called to bear. So this week we start the remembrance and the celebration of the first coming of the Messiah, of the King, of the one that has laid the foundation of which we should be living our lives and given us the model to live by, to make the world a better place, to be what the world needs. And I think sometimes we get in that, a lot of our brothers and sisters in other buildings, I won't say it about this one, but it's always fun to point out what people what we think are doing wrong, because it makes us feel a little better. But there's a lot of believers, or people, professed believers, that what they say, their message, and their mission and their actions do not align. And that's where we can be the difference. It bothers me sometimes that I get associated with folks like that, because I'm going to do what I need to do. I'm going to do what I can. I'm not going to tell anybody about it. I'm just going to smile and try to love people. But some people think that they love people by this right here. Some of you may have had parents that way, but that's okay. They didn't know. I had to apologize to my son one day, because he was on me about my life one day, and real about how hard I'd been on him. I said, look, I was growing up with you. I was 20 when I had you. I had to grow up too. He pointed out Georgia got a little bit different way to go with it, but that's... Then I told him, well, maybe she was just a better kid than you, and then that's when the fight started. But if we're living a life as Jesus called us to do, a life of hope, we will have peace, love, and joy. And those all come from hope, of being able to see things in a better way, being able to do things, not to see people as they are, but what they can be. That's hope. That's positivity. Not to see the situation as it is, but see where the situation will be on the other side. And the last hope that we have is that when our time here is done, when our practice game here is over, is that we will then go into eternity where our hope will be fulfilled, and we'll be accountable for how we lived. But that starts this week with that candle right there because of the hope that Jesus brought to us. In closing, I'm going to quote a song that I remember from my youth. And some of it, I don't think anybody here was around when it was written because it was 1834, but I might be surprised. From Edward Mote, he summarized the Christian's hope in his now famous hymn, "My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand." And that's what we need to remember as we go forward this week with the message of hope. Have the mindset and the hope that things will be better, but be prepared to be the one to do the work to make it better. Maybe for you, maybe for your family, maybe somebody you know. But there are plenty of people that are out there that need you to be their hope. So that's my challenge to you as you go out this week. Matt, we have a closing hymn. All right, we'll do a closing hymn. If anybody needs prayer or you need, want to come forward or ask for prayer or talk about something, I'll shuffle you off to Louise, or one of us will handle it. But I appreciate you guys being here this morning and giving me a chance to stand up and share. And I'm excited about the holiday season that we have coming up because I know that we're going to do some great things as a church. We do have a little transition going on. We have we're looking for a minister. We're also getting ready to seat a new board in January. So that's always an exciting time. But I'm hopeful for the future of our church and our congregation. And I'm also very hopeful about what we're going to accomplish and what we're going to do in the coming year. So go ahead, Matt.